Today, you're going to learn two things. Number one, how do you respond when your opponent attacks you immediately? They're super aggressive. Even before they've developed their pieces, they just start attacking you. What do you do? And the second thing we're going to talk about as we get to the end game, when you have a couple of extra pawns, what's the best way to use them to put pressure on your opponent and ultimately win the end game? Okay, so this is an extremely instructive game. It comes out of the book Logical Chess Move by Irving Chernev. And this is game 28 in a series. There's a playlist on the channel where we go through every game. It's one of the most instructive types of videos that I think I create. And so I highly encourage you to go back and check out some of those previous ones. But let's go ahead and get started. So we have a Scandinavian. Now, I like to play the Scandinavian as black, but when they capture, I usually actually bring out my knight and then try to get the bishop on g4. It's called a Portuguese variation. But in this game, we see queen takes d5, which kind of is the more popular way, or it used to be the more popular way to play this. The drawback is your queen gets harassed by the knight, and so you have to waste some time moving your queen. They actually swing the queen over to a5. But I want to point something out because a lot of beginners will go for something like this, a cheap check. And they think, oh, they're attacking you, and if you try to block, they're going to bring out their bishop and they're pinning you, and they want you to play knight f3 because then they take it, and your bishop is pinned, so you have to mess up your pawn structure, okay? But I'm going to show you a very simple and easy solution. You can simply play d4, chase the queen around, and if they go back, you just play bishop e3, you break the pin, now you're threatening to simply take them, so they have to kind of trade. And then when you recapture, look at this. You have 3 pieces developed. They have no minor pieces. The only piece that they have is the queen. It's not even on a good square. It's blocking this pawn. And it's just a bad position for black. Okay? So that's just a simple way to respond to this queen e5 move. But in the game, they actually played queen to a5. Now, d4 gets a pawn in the center, which is great. And black immediately strikes with e5. Now, I actually like this style of play. I like to be aggressive and just kind of threaten things right away, and that's what black is doing, so I can relate to that. But if you know what you're doing, you should be able to get into good positions against people who play that way, and that's exactly what we see here by white. They don't panic. They just bring out their knight. They just attack the pawn, but also defend at the same time and develop a piece, accomplish multiple things at the same time. That's a great strategy. Bishop to b4 pins the knight, attacks the knight, and again, we see white doesn't panic. They just play bishop d2. Breaks the pin, defends the knight, develops a piece, accomplishes multiple things again at the same time. Bishop to g4. And at this moment in the game, I would like you to pause and think for a moment. There is a list here in the book. For those of you who haven't already read the book, what do you think are the drawbacks to black's position based on how they have played? He lists 4 things, or kind of 4 principles that black has violated by the way they've played so far in the game. If you would like to pause, what do you think those 4 things are? All right, well, if you had a chance to think about that, I'll go ahead and read them to you here. Number 1, he brought the queen out too early. So if you remember back to the start of the game, that was the first thing he did, brings the queen out, right? Number 2, he's moved the same piece twice in the opening. That's kind of related to that, but because the queen got attacked, he had to move it again. So he had to spend 2 moves moving the same piece. Okay, which is generally not a good strategy at the start of the game. Number 3, he's developed bishops before his knights. Okay, there's a principle that generally speaking, you want to develop your your knights first before the bishops, and that's what white did. And one of the reasons for that, by the way, is you pretty much always know where your knights are going to be best placed, right? Here and here. The bishops, it's kind of like, I don't really know. You might want to use it to break a pin. You might want to use it to go on the offensive. You might want to put it somewhere else, right? You don't really know until the game kind of develops, and so you get more information, okay? And so white did a good job of that. And then number 4, black has launched an attack before he's completed his development, okay? So there's another principle that says you want to develop all your pieces, all the knights and bishops, and usually get castled first before you just start launching an attack, right? And so that's what black has kind of failed to do. The question is it enough that white can take advantage of that? And the answer is yes. So how do they respond here? They simply play the move bishop to e2. Same kind of thing, right? You break the pin, you defend the knight, you develop a piece, you get ready to castle if you need to. Multiple things in one move. So here, black actually trades, but I want to ask you guys a question. If they would have played the move knight to c6, just developing and putting more pressure on d4, what move should you play here as a white? There's a very nice move here. See if you can find it. If you had a chance to look at that, the nice move for white is actually just a3. And the idea is very simple. We want the bishop to move, Because, well, first of all, if it retreats like this, we're going to follow up with b4. And what you will notice about the black queen is that it doesn't have a lot of places to go. Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at the bishop slicing across here. All of these squares are controlled, which means the queen has to go back to b6, and then guess what? Knight to a4 traps the queen. Look at this, look at this. It's attacked, and it can't go anywhere, okay? So you just win the queen, essentially. So that's one idea. The other idea of a3 is that if the bishop takes, you take back with a tempo on the queen, and then you're going to win a pawn here with your knight jumping in. And of course, this is just a simple trade, not a big deal. Then you have pressure on the king this way, and you just win a pawn for free, okay? So a3 was actually the move. And notice, white didn't play this earlier. He first developed his pieces, and once he's ready, now he takes time to play a move like that to attack the bishop and win a pawn, and the tactics start popping up, okay? All right, let's go back to the game, though, because in the game, black did not do that. They simply captured on d4. All right, so here, of course, white recaptures, and black plays queen e5, just continuing in the ultra-aggressive style of trying to really put the pressure on white. They're adding a pin here. They're attacking the knight. What move would you guys play here as white? If you had a chance to look at that, I really like white's move here. They actually take this opportunity to transition from defending to attacking, okay? And of course, you couldn't just castle. Well, you could castle, but then your knight is hanging, and I guess there's actually a tactic here where you take the bishop and it's not a bad position, but it gets a little bit tricky after bishop d6 because then there's a checkmate threat, and it's kind of wild. But the move that was played in the game, knight c to b5, I really like it because number one, you defend, but you also create a threat at the same time, which a lot of times in chess are some of the most powerful moves. You are threatening this fork if black's queen ever moves. You're also threatening here. And there's still tension here, but of course that's defended. And so it's a really nice move, I think, that just kind of goes on the offensive. And white is basically saying, look, I have 4 pieces out. You only have 2 in the queen. I should try to find an aggressive move. And that's where they come up with this idea, okay? So black is basically forced to trade here. Otherwise, you're going to start getting into trouble. So they trade the bishop. They trade the other bishop. And even though the king is forced out, it's important to note that the queen is pinned, which means white is guaranteed that a queen trade is going to happen, which is very, very good when your king is moving out in the center, right? You don't want queens to be on the board, but they calculated that, and that's why they were okay playing this move because of the forced queen trade right here, okay? So black does trade. And now we can see the threat on c7 that black has to deal with. So they play knight to a6 to add a defender. Okay. All right. And actually, I want to back up just for a moment here. There's a note in the book that I thought was interesting. Tarrasch was playing this position as white. And he says in the note that Tarrasch himself considered the game to be won at this point. At this point, the game is just won. Why would he say that? Why do you guys think he would say that? Well, the answer is he has so many extra moves. So if you imagine that the king was back here, and this knight was back here, and this knight was back here, we would have an equal position, exactly identical, everything would be the same, right? But if you did have that position and white could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we would now have this position. Essentially, white has 5 free moves, or tempo, we say in chess, right? That is why he said it's a winning position. There's just no way that I'm not going to be able to find some sort of a tactic, launch some kind of an attack. I have 5 free moves, right? And so that's kind of what's happening here. So black tries to defend with knight to a6. Let's keep going. The rook comes over, getting ready to put the black king in check. And so, for example, if you were to play a move like knight e7, king f3 would be very dangerous because now your knight is pinned. You can't castle because then you lose a knight, and it's a rough position for black to be in. So black decides to castle to try to get away, and this is kind of a critical moment in the game. If you want to pause, what do you think white played here? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is actually knight takes a7 check. Now, this is an interesting move because on one hand, you think, oh, it's a free pawn with check. I should take it. But on the other hand, you have to understand, well, what happens after king b8? Because now your knight is under attack. And when I looked at this position initially, I was like, wait a second. When I go back, I think I'm in trouble because c6 is going to attack my knight, and that knight is defending this knight. And how do you avoid losing a knight, right? The answer is you really can't. However, there's a tactic here that Tarrasch was setting up, and it's the move, wait for it, knight to c6 check. Okay, it's a fork. You have to sacrifice one knight to do it, which means you're actually going to be losing both of your knights, but you're going to be getting two pawns and a rook. Now, this is an interesting moment, okay? Because normally, if you've followed the channel for any amount of time, you'll know that I say this: 2 pieces for a rook and a pawn. I would normally want to have the 2 pieces. I don't want to give up my 2 pieces for just a rook and a pawn. In this exchange, and this is what happened in the game, in this exchange, white actually gave up the 2 knights for a rook and 2 pawns. Okay, now a rook and 2 pawns is kind of where it's usually equal. However, depending on what else is going on, it could go in favor of the 2 pieces, or it could go in favor of the person with the rook and 2 pawns. Okay, what I mean by that is it depends on what else is going on in the position. So if those 2 pieces, in this case the 2 knights, were very active, if they had nice outposts where they were defended by the pawns, if the rooks were stuck somewhere where they couldn't get into the game quickly, there was no open files for them to use, the 2 pieces would probably be better than the rook and 2 pawns. But in a game like this, guess what? There's 2 open files that the rooks can very easily use. Actually, that's exactly what happens. The rook comes over next move. There's 2 open files that they can very easily use, and the knights are not in great positions, right? This knight's on the edge of the board. This knight is undeveloped. So because of those factors, it actually was a good trade for white to give up the 2 pieces for the rook and 2 pawns. Okay, but I want you to think through that next time you're kind of deciding, should I do this or not? Those are the kind of things you want to think about. Okay, well, let's keep going back to the game here. So the king moves over, king to d3. Remember, at the end of the game, the active king wins. That's exactly what white is doing, and he's getting a bonus. He's doing it with the check on the king. Knight e7, king c4, and he's running where? To where he has the passed pawns. Okay, and that's general principle. When you have passed pawns on a certain section of the board, that's where you want to focus, especially at the end game. Okay, notice he's not running his king this way. He doesn't have an advantage over here. It's just equal. It's going to be hard to really do anything. But here, he could support these pawns, push them down the board, and cause black some serious problems. Okay? So black goes h5, and you have to get your rook into the game somehow, but what else can you do? Because you need to leave, the king here guarding all these squares. This is kind of the only way to get the rook into the game. Rook to d3. White is getting ready to double up and try to win a piece. And so black says, no, I better get ready to defend by putting my knight on c6. That's exactly what we see. So what does white do? b4. The knight is defending the other knight. If we can chase that away, guess what? We're going to grab the knight here for free. So black plays the move f6. Now I have a question for you. How does f6 stop the threat of b5 winning the piece? Well, the answer is if you play b5 right now, the knight would simply jump to e5 with check, and the pawn is defending it, also blocks off the rooks from getting here. That's the idea. Okay, so what does white do instead? f4 takes away the square from the knight. Okay, this is important. When you have the rook and 2 pawns, you need to use your pawns to help control the squares that those pieces would like to go to. That's exactly what white is doing. And here black plays the move king f7. It's your move as white. What move would you play here? All right, I hope you didn't say b5. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of you watching this video did say b5. And here's the thing. It logically seems like it would be the move that you would want to play, right? We attack the knight. We wanted to chase it away, but there was knight e5. We prevented knight e5. So now we would like to go for this threat, right? Makes a lot of sense. It's actually a blunder, and you totally lose your advantage. You can actually even get checkmated if you're not careful. Here's why. Because the knight sneaks over to a5. This is like a little trap. It sneaks over to a5, and you have to be careful. If you go back here, you get forked. If you go, let's just say to like d3, well, then the knight's no longer pinned. It can just move, and the game goes on. If you go up, same thing. The knight can kind of just move. So the only way to really keep up the pressure is to go to b4, because then you're keep the attack on both pieces, right? Look at what happens. Knight to d5 check. And you might be thinking, yeah, but I'm going to get 2 knights for the rook. I'm going to have 2 extra pawns. I'm fine, right? No, because black's not going to take you. Black's going to go checkmate. Game over. You lose. Goodbye. Wow. How's that for a sneaky little trap? So king to f7 was a very clever move by black, and you had to watch out for that. Okay, so go ahead, leave me a comment. Say I played b5, or something about b5 if you fall for that. That's a tough one, so don't feel bad, but I'm going to guess a lot of people in the comments probably wanted to play that. So Tarash, obviously an extremely strong player, does not do that and instead simply plays the move a4. He's like, look, I don't need to rush with that. Let me just push my pawns and I'll just wait. All right, that's what happens. So black plays rook b8, trying to get the rook into the game. White simply plays c3, just defending the threat. No need to panic there, using the pawns. Rook to d8 gets control of the file. And here, the author makes a nice point. The move is rook to d3, and he says that one of the points that beginner learns painfully is that he must fight for control of every bit of territory, whether it's a file, a diagonal, a square, and it's often necessary to trade pieces to do that. And his point is that you never want to give your opponent's counterplay, right? You don't want to allow this rook to come down and start attacking your pawns and then maybe swing over from behind and start, poking at you. You don't want to do that. And so what do? Well, you just gain control of the file and you fight for every section of the board that your opponent is trying to do something on, right? We've seen that even as he's been pushing his pawns, right? This pawn was to stop the knight. This pawn was to control over here. He's using every piece that he has to stop the counterplay. Okay, very, very important. So we get the trade. King goes back. a5. Past pawns must be pushed, but he's not pushing them prematurely. He's keeping them together where they're defended. Doesn't have to worry about them getting captured. King comes up, and now a6. Very nice move. And he's basically saying, look, I don't want your king to keep running over here, so I'm going to stop that. Now, the question for you is, how does this move stop the king from coming over? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, the idea is that if the king keeps running, he's going to play b5, and the knight is no longer defending this knight, and so you would simply capture it. Okay, so I guess technically the a6 move didn't really threaten b5. It just sort of like you have to basically stop it, but you can't use your king. I can't kind of mess that up. But the point is, he's creating threats that are very serious, and the king can't simply just come over and blockade them because of b5. Okay, so what does black do? Knight to d5. Rook comes over, getting ready to push. If black were to take this pawn, it's game over because the king comes up. If you do this, a7, and now you have to give up your knight, and you lose the game. Okay, the rook's going to be too powerful against the knight. So because of that, black says, nope, I better blockade it with knight to a7. All right, so white plays g3, just defending the pawn here on f4. c6, rook comes up to a4. Very clever move. He wants to keep the rook behind the pass pawn to keep the pressure here, but he also wants to start pushing this pawn. But you can't right now because you would simply lose this pawn on b4, right? So what does he do? Well, he uses his rook to support it so that now he can play c4. The knight jumps back. Black doesn't want to wait for that, so the rook moves up, which now attacks over here. Black defends with g6, and now white finally pushes the pawn. Okay, so this is something very common in endgames. You have to do a lot of maneuvering to accomplish one little objective, and then you do it again, right? You get one little thing accomplished, move on to the next part of your plan. You might have to do some maneuvering. You get that accomplished, move on to the next. And all the while, you have to do it without giving your opponent counterplay, right? That's the important thing. So that's what happens here. He gets the pawn where he wants it. And now, rook to a1. Very interesting move. He just spent all this time coming up here, coming up here. Remember, he was trying to achieve this objective of pushing the pawn to c4, which he did. And now he's going to do something else, namely bring the rook over here and try to invade a different way. Okay? Knight to d6. Let me see something here. No, there's not yet. Okay, king goes to d4. Knight goes back. Black doesn't really have much that they can do. They kind of have to just sit and wait and see what white's going to come up with. King invades to c5. And black plays the move king to c7. But I want to ask you the question. If they would have played knight to d6, what would you play here as white? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, hopefully you noticed that there's a pin here. So you can play rook d1, pinning the knight. And after black defends, you have a really nice tactic to finish off the game. That's correct. You sacrifice the rook for the knight, and then the pawn sneaks by. There's no way for the knight or the king to stop it, and you're going to get a queen next move. All right? So always be on the lookout for those little tactics. That was a nice one there. So king c5, king c7, and now white proceeds with bringing the rook over here. The king kind of has to stay over here to stop these pawns, otherwise they start pushing. But the rook is also threatening to come in, and it's just a bad situation for black. They move their knight, the rook comes down, the knight comes back, and if you would like to pause, white found a move here that caused black to resign. Try to think through this and imagine that you're playing this game as white. You have to find the winning move. What is it? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, it's actually sacrificing the rook for the knight. Now, this is a tricky moment because your king is in check. So you have to decide, do I give it up or do I actually retreat? And if you retreat, you have to be careful because now c5 happens. If you make the mistake of taking that, you're actually going to lose the game because knight c6 is a fork, okay? And now you lose your rook. Black has the 2 knights and your pawns are all messed up. So you have to be really careful, okay? So the winning move was not retreating the king, but sacrificing here so that you can sneak by with your pawns, but it's not that simple. What's the winning move for white? Hopefully you didn't say king b6, okay? And this is, again, another moment where you could go wrong. The move is b5, because after takes, there's no way for black to stop you, okay? If they go here, you just push b6 anyway. If they try to come over the king, you fork them. And if they go back, you go there anyway, you trap the knight. There's just no way to stop it. Okay, so that was the winning move, b5. If you thought you could sneak your king in to get the knight out, you would be mistaken. Knight to c8, check. King comes up. Knight to d6, check. King comes up, trying to get your pawn. But look at this. Takes, and knight to b6 stops you. Yes, you can sacrifice it and win the knight, but now you have an endgame where you're probably just going to lose, okay? Because your king is in the corner and black's king is actually going to be closer to the pawns. Okay, so the move is actually c5, which is kind of wild. If they take, the king just comes up. Actually, no, it's some sort of crazy zugzwang thing where you have to do this. I don't even know what's going on. Apparently, you box out the king, you push your pawns. It's a weird position, but the point is, if anybody has chances to win, it would be black. Okay, so the winning move, going back, I don't want to go down that rabbit trail anymore. The winning move is b5, right? You just push the pawn. You can't stop these if you're black. Okay, so super instructive game, really nice endgame, but also even earlier, just how calmly and simply white defended against the premature attack. Hope you guys learned something, and next game is game 29 on page 206. I'll see you guys there. As always, stay sharp, play smart, and take care.